There's a moment in Mushoku Tensei that changes everything. Rudeus stands in front of his father, a man he judged his entire second life, and realizes he's been making the exact same mistakes, the same cowardice, the same selfishness, the same pattern, just dressed up in different circumstances. That moment only lands the way it does because of everything Rudeus refused to face before it. In this video, we're breaking down why the most important scene in Mushoku Tensei isn't a magic battle. It's a son finally seeing himself in his father. But to understand why that mirror is so devastating, we have to talk about the three women Rudeus was given everything by, and how he nearly threw it all away. Sylphie, Roxy, Eris, three people who each loved him in completely different ways, and three people he failed, avoided, or took for granted, before he finally learned what responsibility actually looks like. Before we get into the relationships, we need to establish what makes Rudeus different from almost every other Isekai protagonist, and why that difference matters. Most Isekai heroes are blank slates. They're transported to another world, they discover a power, and the narrative rewards them for existing. The world bends around them, conflict dissolves in front of their op build. Rudeus is not that. He dies as a 34-year-old NEET, someone who spent decades hiding from his own life after a humiliating incident in school broke him. He never recovered, he never tried, he just stopped. Like and subscribe, then let's get started. When he's reborn into the world of Mushoku Tensei with his memories intact, he gets a second chance most people would kill for. And the show is brutally honest about what he does with that second chance. He starts to grow, really grow, as a child. He works hard. He practices magic obsessively. He builds relationships. He becomes someone his first life never let him be. But here's the thing the show never lets you forget. His old wounds travel with him. The cowardice, the avoidance, the inability to face painful things directly. That 34-year-old broken man is still in there, underneath the magical prodigy. And the moment life gets hard enough, the moment real emotional stakes show up, that old self comes crawling back. That's what makes Rudeus interesting. He's not growing from zero, he's fighting against himself. Sylphie is the first real relationship Rudeus builds in his new life, and in a lot of ways, she's the clearest mirror of who he is as a person. Sylphie is lonely, isolated, mocked for being different. Sound familiar? When Rudeus meets her, he sees himself in her immediately. And so he reaches out, not because he's a hero, but because he understands what it feels like to be that alone. That's a genuinely earned connection. It's not manufactured by the plot. It grows out of shared vulnerability. They become close, best friends, in every real sense of the word. Sylphie trusts Rudeus completely, and he trusts her. He teaches her. She grounds him. There's something almost effortless about their bond, which is exactly why what comes next hurts so much. The teleportation incident tears them apart. Rudeus loses nearly everything he's built. His family is scattered, his home is gone, and Sylphie, the person who was closest to him, simply vanishes. For a long time, Rudeus doesn't know if she's alive. And when he finally finds her, years later, older, changed, going by a different name, he doesn't recognize her immediately, but she recognizes him. That reunion is one of the most emotionally loaded scenes in the series, because it reveals something important. Sylphie never stopped loving him, even after everything. Even after years of separation and uncertainty, she rebuilt herself, but she kept him at the center of it. What does Rudeus do with that? Initially, he fumbles it, not maliciously, but because Rudeus has a pattern. When someone gives him something unconditional, his first instinct isn't to rise to meet it. It's to feel unworthy, to second guess, to quietly accept without truly receiving. Sylphie doesn't need him to be perfect. She needs him to actually show up. And slowly, painfully slowly, he learns how to do that. Their relationship becomes the emotional anchor of the series because it's built on the purest foundation. Two people who were each other's first real friend, finding their way back. But Rudeus almost ruins it by being a passive participant in his own life. He nearly lets the best thing that ever happened to him slip by because showing up fully is terrifying. That's the lesson Sylphie teaches him. Love isn't just feeling something, it's choosing every day to be present. Let's talk about Roxy Magurdia. Roxy arrives in Rudeus' life at its lowest point, before his second life has really begun, when he's still a terrified child locked inside a house, too paralyzed by past trauma to walk outside. His parents don't know what to do with him. The world outside feels impossible. And then Roxy walks in. She's young. She's a little awkward. She's not some grand mentor figure with a booming presence. She's just a girl who's good at magic and decent at teaching, and who, crucially, treats Rudeus like he's capable. She doesn't pity him. She doesn't coddle him. She gives him a challenge, watches him rise to it, and then gives him a harder one. And in doing so, she becomes the first person in either of his lives to make him feel genuinely competent. When she leaves, Rudeus is devastated. He builds a shrine, and yes, the show acknowledges how strange that is. It's played with some self-awareness, but underneath the awkwardness is something real. She was the first person who made him believe he could be more than what he was. That's a profound thing to owe someone. The complicated part of Rudeus's relationship with Roxy is how long it takes him to evolve from devotion into something mature. For years, Roxy exists in Rudeus's mind as almost a mythologized figure, the teacher, the ideal, the person he measures himself against. He doesn't really know her as a full person. He knows what she gave him. When they meet again later in the story, as adults, as peers, the dynamic shifts. Rudeus has to confront that the Roxy in his head isn't the same as the Roxy who exists in the world. She has her own insecurities, her own failures, her own loneliness. She's not an ideal, she's a person. And watching Rudeus learn to love the real version, the vulnerable, uncertain, still growing Roxy, is one of the most quietly meaningful arcs in the series. Because Roxy represents something specific in Rudeus's journey, the difference between admiring someone and actually seeing them. Rudeus spent years carrying an image of her. Growing up means letting that image go and making room for who she actually is. She believed in him before he believed in himself. His responsibility, the one he eventually earns, is to return that belief honestly. And then there's Eris. If Sylphie is the anchor and Roxy is the foundation, then Eris is the earthquake. Eris Rudeus Greyrat enters the story as Rudeus's student, a noblewoman with a ferocious temper, almost no patience, and zero social refinement. She's the opposite of Rudeus in almost every way. He's cautious, cerebral, avoidant. She's explosive, physical, immediate. She is also, in her own chaotic way, completely genuine. What starts as a tutoring arrangement becomes something much more real over the course of their journey together after the teleportation incident scatters Rudeus's world. They're thrown into survival together, just the two of them, navigating a dangerous world. And in that crucible, something grows. Eris becomes one of the most important people in Rudeus's life, maybe the most formative relationship he has as a young man. She protects him, she challenges him, she's furious at him and devoted to him at the same time. And then she leaves. The morning after they've crossed a threshold that felt like a promise, she's gone. No explanation. A note that barely explains anything. Rudeus wakes up alone and spends years believing she abandoned him, that she didn't love him, that he was, in the end, not enough. It breaks him. Not metaphorically, literally. Rudeus goes into a depression so severe it affects his physical ability to function. He shuts down. He can't cast magic. He barely eats. The same wound from his first life, the one about being fundamentally unlovable and unworthy, tears back open with a violence that the first life never quite managed. And here's where Mushoku Tensei does something most Isekai never attempt. It doesn't rush the healing. Rudeus doesn't bounce back in an episode. He doesn't fight his way out of the depression with a power-up. He crawls through it, slowly, with help, with backslides, with moments where he seems better and then crashes again. The truth about Eris, that she left because she loved him, because she felt too weak to stand beside him and needed to grow stronger first, doesn't make the wound disappear. It recontextualizes it, but it doesn't erase the years Rudeus spent believing the worst about himself. What Eris teaches Rudeus, the brutal, necessary lesson, is that love is not protection from pain. Even real love, even the people who care about you most can wreck you unintentionally by making choices without you. And you don't get to avoid that by loving more carefully or closing yourself off more completely. You only survive it by learning how to keep going after. Rudeus eventually learns that, but he earns it the hard way. Now we come back to where we started. Paul Greyrat is not a good father for most of the story. He's warm and charming on the surface, but underneath he's a man who abandoned his responsibilities, cheated on his wife, scattered his family across the world through his own negligence, and then had the audacity to be furious at everyone else for the chaos that followed. Rudeus judges him harshly for this, and honestly, he's not wrong to. But here's what the show is building toward. When Rudeus finally stands in front of his father, older now, having lived through Eris, through the depression, through the long, slow work of becoming someone better, and they actually talk, actually fight, he sees himself. The same avoidance dressed up as self-awareness, the same cowardice dressed up as caution, the same pattern of taking what relationships give him and not showing up for what they need. Paul failed his family by running away from difficulty. Rudeus has been failing his relationships by emotionally retreating the moment things got real. Different costumes, same wound. That recognition, the horror of seeing your father's worst qualities in your own behavior, is the true climax of Rudeus's arc, not the battle with Orsted, not the magic achievements. This conversation in this room where a son is forced to admit, I am what I feared I was. And what makes Mushoku Tensei genuinely great is that it doesn't let that realization be the end. Recognition is not redemption. Rudeus still has to choose, again and again, in 100 small moments, to be different. but you can't choose differently until you see clearly. The women in his life, Sylphie, Roxy, Eris, they each handed him a piece of the mirror. Each relationship showed him something he needed to see about himself, and he kept almost dropping the glass. His father showed him the whole reflection at once. Here's why Mushoku Tensei earns its place in the Isekai conversation, even among people who've written the genre off. Most Isekai are power fantasies, and there's nothing wrong with that. But Mushoku Tensei is doing something riskier. It's a responsibility fantasy, not the fantasy of having power and using it well, the fantasy of actually growing up, of becoming someone worthy of the second chance you were given. Rudeus starts as a broken man who gets a do-over. He could have coasted. He almost did, in 100 small ways. But the show keeps raising the stakes, not in terms of enemy power levels, but in terms of emotional weight. The cost of avoidance keeps going up. Sylphie nearly loses him to his own passivity. Roxy nearly stays an idealized memory instead of a real person he gets to know. Eris almost destroys him entirely. Paul almost becomes a cautionary tale Rudeus never learns from. Responsibility, real responsibility, the kind that requires showing up even when it's terrifying, isn't something Rudeus achieves once and keeps forever. It's something he has to choose in the presence of each person who matters to him, over and over again. That's what makes him one of the most interesting isekai protagonists ever written. Not because he's the strongest, because he's the most honestly broken and the most genuinely trying. If you want more deep dives into character writing in anime, hit subscribe. And if you think I got something wrong about Rudeus, or Eris, or Paul, let me know in the comments. I read them. I write a newsletter where I go even deeper on stuff like this, real psychology concepts, anime breakdowns, and things that didn't make the cut for the video. Link is in the description. It's free. Check it out. If you like this breakdown, the next video goes even deeper. Subscribe so you don't miss it. I'll see you there.